This is the Spycraft 101 podcast. Welcome to your clandestine classroom. This is episode number 189 of the Spycraft 101 podcast. My guest for today is Janet Wallach. Janet attended New York University, and her work has been published in the Washington Post magazine, Smithsonian Magazine, and other periodicals. She's the author of 10 books and has written extensively about notable women in history, including Queen Noor of Jordan, Coco Chanel, and Gertrude Bell, among others. I invited Janet onto the podcast to discuss her book, Flirting with Danger, The Mysterious Life of Marguerite Harrison, Socialite Spy, which was published in 2023. It's the story of Marguerite's double life as a reporter and a spy for U.S. Army intelligence in Berlin and Moscow shortly after the Russian Revolution, and what happened to her when she was caught in the act by Soviet intelligence. But before we get into this story, you should know that OC Strategic Academy is here to teach you how to transform your career with the skill of a spy. With OC Strategic Academy, you can learn to understand people on a deeper level, influence decisions and build connections, and gain the edge you've been missing in work, in life, and in every interaction. Each course has been developed by a former war reporter turned human intelligence collector with extensive experience in the Middle East. The courses include Negotiate Like a Spy and Network Like a Spy, plus several others. There is also private one-on-one coaching available if you're interested in training that is tailored directly to your needs. You can find them at academy.ocstrategic.com and use the discount code SPYCRAFT101 to get 10% off any course you decide is right for you. Click the link in the show notes of this episode to level up your human intelligence skills. Janet, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. I've seen Marguerite Harrison's name mentioned very briefly in some other books that I've read about the earliest days of Soviet intelligence, but until I read your book, I had no idea just what a life she led, a life of adventure, and also like what a pivotal role she played in the interwar period in Europe. So this is a very eye-opening read for me, and I'm really grateful that I had the chance to read it.
Well, thank you. And that's part of why I wrote the book, was because very few people know about her now, but she had a very important role during World War I. And it was exciting to uncover it, and it's exciting now to be able to tell people about her and what she did.
Mm-hmm. That's great to hear. It was very thrilling stuff, honestly. So can you tell me how and why you chose her specifically as the subject of your next book? Like, what was the inspiration there?
I look for subjects for women, particularly who were highly intelligent and independent women who really made a mark on the world. And I'm interested in the period around the time of World War I and World War II. And I came across Marguerite's name when I was doing research for a biography of Gertrude Bell, whom very few people had heard about when I first started out on that project. And thanks to the books, she has become a well-known name now. And Gertrude Bell wrote a letter home to her father saying that she had met a very interesting woman who had come to Baghdad, where Miss Bell was based, and she was one of the most intelligent women that Gertrude Bell had ever met and was absolutely fascinating in her stories. And I thought, what was an American woman doing in Baghdad in 1924? And I thought, she must have been a spy. It took me years to actually find information about her. And when I did, it was thrilling. So that's really what made me choose her.
Okay, yeah, that's wonderful inspiration, and your early intuition was dead on as well. And that's in a way, we're going to talk about this later, I'm sure, but in a way, it's amazing because she is such an unusual person in so many ways, and yet she was also very effective. She wasn't really one to slip under the radar, exactly as I'm sure we'll get into a little bit, but she was very, very effective at gathering a lot of intelligence and sending it back home. So I guess we should go all the way back to the beginning of her story. Can you just talk about how she grew up and her marriage and that sort of thing initially?
her family were very important, prominent people in Maryland at the turn of the 20th century. And she grew up with a father who owned an international shipping company and who brought commercial goods with his fleet of ships to Europe and brought goods back to the US. So he was doing a lot of business with Europe at that time. And her mother was a well-known socialite hostess in Baltimore. And Baltimore was one of the richest cities in the country at that time. And the port was extremely important for American goods. So Marguerite grew up in a situation of extreme wealth with nannies and governesses and tutors and she was sent to a very good girls' school, private school. And every summer she went with her family to Europe and spent months there. And she had such a good ear for languages that at the age of 10, she was acting as the family interpreter when they would go to museums or to different places in France, in Germany, in Italy, and just was able to pick up a language very easily. Her mother had one ambition for Marguerite, and that was for her to marry a man not just rich, but with a title. That was very much the style of the Gilded Age, and that was her mother's absolute goal for Marguerite. And so she was a debutante who had what was called a coming out party. She was presented to society, and it was understood that now she was of a marriageable age, and she was taken off to Europe to find the right man with the right title. Well, Marguerite was a rebel, and so she found men with titles. She found one who was a Turkish bey, Turkish aristocrat, who turned out to be absolutely charming and brilliant, but also one of the members of the Young Turks. So he was out to rebel against his government and was actually in a very dangerous situation. Her mother was not too crazy about that idea. And then Marguerite was very flirtatious with an Italian prince who spent most of his time in dueling sessions with other men. And that didn't appeal to her mother either. So she was brought back. Oh, and then there was one fellow whom her mother really liked. One fellow her mother really liked was the son of her mother's friend. And Marguerite went out with him a couple of times, went dining and dancing, and then refused to go anymore because she said that fellow was so dull, and every time they went dancing, he stepped on her toes. Well, his name was Winston Churchill.
Oh, my goodness.
And I think later on she kind of regretted her attitude. But that's the level of society that she knew and was friends with.
Mm-hmm.
But when she came home, she fell in love with a handsome, charming, socially very acceptable young fellow. No title because he was American, but he also had no money, and her mother was livid. Marguerite insisted on marrying him, and so she did. And in the end, her mother, after many temper tantrums and screaming and yelling at Marguerite, her mother gave her one of the most lavish weddings ever held in Baltimore. And they went off on their honeymoon. 9 months later, she had a son, and all was looking great, just great. She was a real socialite, a socialite matron with charity lunches and proper dinners and dances at the country club. She helped out with the charities, and in fact, even started one herself, which was very worthwhile. It was to help children who are in the hospital and too ill to leave the hospital and go to school. And so she created this educational group that helped these young children, and it was eventually taken over by Johns Hopkins. So
Oh my goodness.
it was an important charitable work that she did.
So I understand that she became a reporter at some point. Was that unusual for a woman of her place in society at that time to hold down a job of that nature?
It certainly was, and the circumstances were unusual also. Her husband died at a young age. He had a brain tumor and
Oh
died.
gosh.
And so at the age of 37 in 1915, she was left a widow without very much money. In fact, he left her with debts. Most society ladies would have gone back to their families and lived with their families. And she had a son, as I said, who was born right after they married. So that would have been the proper thing to do. Well, she wasn't interested in the proper thing to do. She was independent and she wanted to get a job. She went to the Baltimore Sun and got a job as a assistant society editor. Well, that made sense because she knew all the social people and who was having what party and who was there and so on. And then she was given a more interesting position as drama and music critic for the Baltimore Sun. And that was a pretty important job. So that was unusual. And when the United States was thinking about entering the war, World War I, Marguerite was made a reporter. And her job was to really promote patriotism, to help raise money for bonds, to help women understand that their men needed to go off to war if we did join the war, and that women could take jobs to replace the men no matter what kind of work they did, so that their families would have enough food on the table. And people were worried about that kind of thing. And so she did pretty wild and crazy things in her reporting. In fact, she went out to Long Island to a secret army base and flew in a prop plane that went an exciting 96 miles an hour.
Mm.
And it was a two-seater plane. And that was a fascinating story for her. And she also did a number of stories where she actually took jobs that men ordinarily had just to show that a woman could do it. So it was everything from being a conductor on a streetcar to working at Bethlehem Steel, where she was driving at their shipbuilding plant, her job was to drive rivets into the sides of ships. And this was hard work. And she was excellent at it. And in fact, when she left the job, one of the men at the plant told her he was amazed that she was able to do it, and he would think about women in a whole different light from then on.
Mm. That was one of my favorite anecdotes from the whole book, honestly, was the Bethlehem Steel work.
Thank you. Yeah, it was impressive work and tough work, but she did it. And that was an indication of what Marguerite was like.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So at what point did she come to the attention of military intelligence?
She wanted very much as a reporter when we did join the war. She was a reporter covering the war. She knew a lot about European history and about European politics, the current politics. and she wanted very much to be at the front. Well, women were not allowed at the front. That was a rule of the U.S. government. And then she came up with an idea, a different way to get there, and that was to work for military intelligence. Well, only the Navy had a Department of Intelligence up until then. And so she applied, and they looked at her application and said, absolutely not. She was a woman, and the head of the Navy wanted nothing to do with having women in their intelligence service. And then she had another thought. The Army was just creating a military division, and so she applied to them. And they looked at her application and said, well, this is interesting. And so they sent someone out to interview her. One of the things that was so impressive about her was her language skills. And she spoke German fluently. And so the interviewer asked her, how come? He was suspicious. Why do you speak German so well? How much time have you spent in Germany? And he was trying to find out if she was actually a spy for the Germans.
Mm-hmm.
Well, she took great affront at that and said, I am an 8th generation American and a great patriot. And I do speak German like a native, and I speak French like a native, and also Italian and Spanish. And later on, she also learned Polish and Russian. And yeah, so it was impressive. Anyway, after that interview, the head of the American Army Military Intelligence, whose name was Marlborough Churchill, wonderful name, said, okay, you are hired. And so in 1918, she was taken on as a spy for American military intelligence.
That is amazing. And I know it's unconventional thinking, but, of course you don't want to send someone over that draws immediate suspicion as a potential spy. If they were only sending men before, of course she would be quite disarming. And she was a very charming person anyway. She could put anybody at ease, it seemed like.
Yes, she was. In fact, one of her tutors had said to her, Marguerite, you can be an intellectual if you like, but you'll get much further in life if you're charming. And she took that to heart, and she used that much to her advantage all through her life.
Oh, absolutely. That was so impressive. Just throughout the book, there's one instance after another where she just shows up somewhere new and strikes up a conversation and makes like a friend for life, practically, or, a source of information, of course. But it's just amazing. Everywhere she went, people would just open up to her and vice versa. And just amazing how easy it was for her to form relationships.
Exactly. But, I think what's interesting too is, just as you said, not only was she able to speak to the people as a complete native, but she paid attention to what they were saying. And that made her a good spy.
Mm-hmm.
Because
did she have to
they
go
had
through
a lot to tell her.
Oh, they certainly did. Did she have to go through any training, like tradecraft training or anything before they sent her over? I mean, it sounds like the military intelligence division was very new. They probably didn't have a whole lot of structured training even available at that point.
They did not. She really went on her own. But the timing was kind of odd, because just as she was getting her papers in order, it was 1918. And the Germans asked for an armistice. And so that she was so disappointed. And when her phone rang a couple of days later, she was just sure that was going to be the end of the job. But in fact, the U.S. needed her even more then, because we were planning to be in Paris at talks with our allies, the British, the French, and the Italians, on how to get reparations and what kind of reparations. And we knew nothing about what had been going on in Germany. We didn't have anybody there. If we had people, Americans reporting back, it was from the front, and the actual front was in France and Belgium and a little bit in Italy. So we needed to know the political, the economic, the social, the psychological situation in Germany. Were they rich? Were they poor? Did they believe that they lost the war, or did they believe they won the war? How was their industrial situation? How was their food supply? How much money did they have, and how strong was their army? All of that was what she had to find out. That was her mission.
Yeah, just tremendously broad in scope, and it does not sound like there were a lot of other people going, like they weren't dropping a whole network in there or anything. Was it difficult for her to actually just physically make it into Germany as an American woman at the end of the war?
She had a very hard time when she got to Berlin, because that was her posting, because Germany was torn apart. The Kaiser had fled. The socialists, who were called the Spartacus, and the monarchists, who were the nationalists, were fighting in the street. And so when she arrived at the train station, she had a hard time finding a cab to take her, and had to take a horse and carriage, a rundown horse and carriage, and literally went through the street fighting and had to duck and hide in the carriage while they went through the main part of Berlin, right near her hotel. So that was a pretty scary beginning to the adventure.
That was right at the beginning of the Spartacus Uprising, I think it was, which sounds like it was extremely violent.
Exactly. It was extremely violent, and she saw it. She went right out into the streets whenever there were protests, because she wanted to hear what people were saying, and she could just sort of sidle up to any group and, become part of the conversation because of her language skills. And she got terrific information. She also went there with a list of people to try to meet. And one of them was an American socialite from Philadelphia, whose mother had been more successful in marrying her off. She had married an aristocrat who turned out to be a German general. And so Marguerite went to see them and have tea with them, and discovered that they were really angry at the United States. He accused us of having a terrible force of men, that they were not very good fighters. We had good weapons, but not good fighters. And the American wife was livid that President Wilson had joined the Allies in a war, and they thought very little of it. But using her charm, Marguerite was able to become friends with them. They invited her to dinner, and she met many important people who were on the nationalist, the monarchist side of things. And she sent home very interesting information from those dinners, including a tremendous amount of anti-Semitism, and also plots against the U.S. to start right-wing states in Eastern Europe.
Oh, really? Wow. Okay. Was she there still under the guise of just being a Baltimore Sun reporter?
Yes, she was. That's exactly how she was there.
Was she still actually filing stories with them as well, or was that just something that she told people along the way?
Oh, she filed many stories, and once she came back, the Baltimore Sun ran them as a very, very important series in the papers.
Oh yeah, I bet that was incredible to read. So,
yes.
Highly successful time in Berlin. How long did she stay there before things changed again?
She stayed there until the actual signing of the peace treaty. which was 8 months, if I remember correctly.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, and she was supposed to be gone for a few weeks at the
My
start.
gosh. Okay.
Yeah. So
Any trouble with like internal security or suspicion that she was an American spy, or was it mostly smooth sailing there?
it was pretty much smooth sailing. She did take risks though, because she pretended to be on the other side of the nationalists and the monarchists. She pretended to be a socialist, and so she went to their meetings. She told them that she was a member of the party. And later on, that got her in a lot of trouble. A lot of
Yeah,
trouble.
I
But
can
she
I
was
can imagine.
also doing counterintelligence while she was there, which means that she was reporting on people who were trying to infiltrate the U.S. and or upturn the U.S. in one way or another. And she had been assigned to find out information on one American fellow who was a very popular cartoonist, and she took great risks with her life to find out what the information that was asked of her. But she did it. She did it, and again, that was important information for our government.
Amazing. So after that, she continued on from Berlin. She kept going east, right into Eastern Europe and all the way into Russia eventually. Was that at the direction of military intelligence, or was she just kind of following the leads?
It was. She after the peace treaty, she came home for a short while, did not want to be here. She was ready for her next adventure, and she was fascinated by the Bolsheviks and wondered what kind of impact that whole new social system would have, not only on Russia, because it was just at the end of the Bolshevik Revolution. So it was 1920 when she got there. And so she proposed that to Marlborough Churchill, her superior, who said, "All right, if you can do it, go for it." She had to get a visa, number one. And for one of the first times in her career, she was unsuccessful. The Bolsheviks refused to give her a visa, but she was determined to go anyway. And she said she was going as a reporter, so it would be fine. She would just sneak into the country and go. And that's exactly what she did. She brought her son with her on the ship going to Europe. She had a belt with gold, filled with gold coins, strapped around her waist. And she took her son and dropped him off at a boarding school in Switzerland, and then made her way through Eastern Europe, through Poland, where she learned Polish and consulted with the Polish army to get across Poland to reach the Russian border. Now, the Russians and the Poles were fighting. The Russians wanted Polish territory, and the Poles were trying to stop them. So Marguerite had to make her way across that border, which was highly dangerous and frightening. She walked through miles of empty, snow-covered land. She trekked her way across and finally got there. And really, that was one of the great risks of her career.
Yeah, I know. I mean, that kind of moves into just like foolhardy territory rather than brave, honestly. But she did make it into Moscow, as we know.
Yes, she did.
So
And
I understand she was she was somewhat sympathetic to socialism in general. I'm not sure how devoted she was to that idea, but she was sort of, left leaning kind of person to begin with. So did she find things that changed her viewpoint on the Bolsheviks once she actually arrived?
well, you're right. She was fascinated by the whole idea of it. And what she saw in some ways impressed her deeply. The education system, the way they cared about the children, their plans all sounded wonderful, whether it was for industry or for fuel and food growing, all of that. It all sounded great on paper. But eventually she saw the total disaster that the country was in. Literally falling apart.
Mm-hmm.
And so she recognized that and sent back vital information about it, which was very helpful to our government. At the same time, she recognized that the Bolshevik government was very powerful and that they had, in general, the support of the people, although there was a lot of questioning because there were food shortages and that kind of thing. But she thought that if the American government recognized the Bolshevik government, that and help them, that would make the population feel friendlier towards our way, and that because of how bad the situation was in Russia, that those people would actually revolt. But the U.S., refused to recognize the Soviet government. In fact, that's part of what was so dangerous about her being there, was that we had no diplomats there. We had no representation there on the part of other governments. And so she was really alone. When she arrived, she had no way of getting information out, and she had no way of connecting with people to give them information inside the country. All of that was part of the challenge for her.
Yeah, that's amazing, out there on your own, not just in a dangerous place, but truly no network, like no embassy to run to or evacuation plan or anything like that at all. So she was taking tremendous risks every single day there.
Yes.
Actually, so how that brings up the question, how was she getting information back? Was it like secret writing, like invisible ink on letters being posted or something like that?
That's exactly right. Well, she did have the cover of being a reporter.
Mm-hmm.
And so she met people, other reporters who were in fact socialists, who came to the country, and a number of them she had met when she was in Germany. So she was able to use them as a vehicle to get information out.
Okay.
She did use invisible ink, and she wrote on the backs of matchbook covers and tiny little things like that. Incredibly difficult to smuggle out, but she did it. In fact, she even smuggled out a huge report on the economic circumstances of Russia at that time. But she had been given this report by an American, asked by Lenin, hired by Lenin to do the report. He wanted a look at all of the factories all around Russia, and this American specialized in that kind of work. And when he was finished with the report, it showed what bad conditions were. And when the report was sent to Lenin, he refused to let the man out and would not let him go back home. And at that point, this man gave the report to Marguerite, who was able to use a diplomat to smuggle it out. And our government was extremely grateful for that report.
Oh, I'll bet. So that's so incredible. I have to assume that if it was commissioned by Lenin, that he had like complete freedom of movement at the time that he was compiling the report. And only after Lenin saw the results of it did he realize how damaging it was. So just tremendously valuable information at that time, I'll bet.
Absolutely. He was treated as I won't say royal guest, as a true guest of the government, only to be turned on and threatened with imprisonment, which he was imprisoned, in fact.
Right. That was amazing that they were able to get that report out at all. And I believe he survived, didn't he? If I recall correctly, he made it out eventually and back to the United States?
Yes, he did. He did.
Okay, just a harrowing ordeal for him, though, especially when he was brought over there on invitation and he did exactly what they asked him to do. That's horrifying.
Right.
So what about Marguerite then? Because she ultimately came under quite a bit of suspicion, or more than suspicion, I guess you could say, right?
Yes, she did. Yes, she did. Well, she was arrested almost as soon as brought to Lubyanka prison very briefly. First couple of days that she was in Moscow, and was under suspicion of being a spy for the Poles because she had been in touch with the Polish army. And since the Russians were still at war with Poland, that was looked upon as, and she had no visa, so she had snuck into the country.
Mm-hmm.
So that was looked upon with a very, very darkened eye. And she was told to just behave herself, and she had 2 weeks to spend in Russia. And that was the typical amount of time that reporters had. And she was working for not only the Baltimore Sun, but more importantly for the AP. And she was acting as a reporter and working every day, every night, and her stories were all censored as they were with every reporter who was there. But that was how she got around. Well, when they let her out, she started doing some pretty courageous / crazy things. She heard about an exhibition of information by the propaganda ministry that was top secret. And she managed to work her way into the Kremlin and into the rooms where this exhibition was. And she took photos of it, she made notes of it, and much of it she actually memorized. She had a photographic memory, and she memorized this. And this was information about all their propaganda work, from their telegraph lines inside Russia to where they had important people around the world.
My goodness.
And all of it, she was able to send back to U.S. military intelligence.
Incredible.
She was able also, she was out strolling and she saw Trotsky and she recognized him. And it was very, very difficult to get an interview with Trotsky. But she didn't care. She just ran up to him and introduced herself and spent a little time. She said, "May I interview you?" And so he seemed very gracious. And she had an interview with him, which she also reported back. So that was important. Our government knew nothing about what the people were like who were running the country, whether it was Trotsky or Lenin. And she knew Lenin. She went to hear him at a great speech that he gave. All of this was vital information for us.
I'll bet. I can only imagine her superiors. I think you mentioned his name was Churchill back at military intelligence, when they get the report saying, something along the lines of, "Oh, and I bumped into Trotsky on the street, and here is what he had to say." Just absolute solid gold, beyond their wildest expectations, I'm sure.
That's right. In fact, Marguerite did wind up in prison, and her father-in-law, who cared very much about her and who was a brilliant man himself, and was doing work for the American government in aeronautics information. But he sent a letter to Army intelligence, military intelligence, saying that he had heard that Marguerite was in prison. And the fellow in command at that time answered him and said, "I wouldn't worry about Marguerite if I were you, even if you heard she was in prison. She's actually probably with Trotsky giving him advice."
Wow. So she did end up, I guess, the second time, as you said, they were, I know that the Czecha, I guess we should talk about the Czecha a little bit. They were already very, very powerful very quickly in the new government there. Did they get her for espionage, or did they get her for overstaying the visa, or something else?
They got her for espionage. They knew that she had broken into that exhibit, or snuck into that exhibit, and that she had that information. And they also found information that she knew was real and that came from the State Department. And so she knew, or from Military Intelligence Department. And so she knew that there was a mole working in intelligence in the U.S.
Oh, wow. That's almost as important as getting Trotsky, if not more so, I have to imagine.
That's right. That's right. And when they arrested her, she was put in solitary confinement. And that was a horrible experience for her. But she handled it with remarkable skill. She managed to focus and to be in the present, is what she told herself. So even though she could hear screams coming from other cells and she could hear gunshots coming from outside in the prison courtyard, she just stayed focused. And she exercised an enormous amount every day. She challenged her memory. She challenged her knowledge of history, of languages, everything she could do to keep herself on her toes and not think about how awful the circumstances were.
Yeah, I'm sure it's very, very difficult to maintain any kind of positive spirit under those circumstances, especially if you're able to hear the screams and the shots like you heard, like those things are happening. It's not just in your imagination at that point. But how long did they keep her in solitary? I mean, did MI even know that she was definitely in prison by that point?
They weren't sure at first because there was nobody there to report on
Right,
it.
exactly.
Yeah, she was there I think about a week, and then she was let out, but she continued in prison for a very long time. She was the only American woman in prison in Lubyanka, which, as we all know, is one of the worst prisons in Russia, and that's saying a lot.
Mm-hmm.
The odd thing and the interesting thing is that she learned so much about Russia being in prison, and she also became close to a number of the women who were in her cell. And of course, the women, it kept changing as women came in, and then they were sent other places, or and once in a while they were freed, released. But what she learned is that they all needed each other. They were all scared. They were all in very dangerous situations. And no matter who they were, of whatever standing, and there were women who were aristocrats, and there were women who were prostitutes, and everything in between. And they became close because they really needed each other's comfort and help just in getting through. That was a valuable lesson for her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm sure that she was a positive. Well, I know that she was. You've documented it very well in the book that she was a really positive influence on everybody there, even under the worst of circumstances. But was she being held awaiting trial, or were they holding her just so they could try to interrogate her and break her?
They wanted to break her. And in fact, what they did is after a few months, they told her that they wanted her to stay there and to become a Soviet spy. That's what they wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And she refused. She did not want to stay in Russia. That was for sure. But in the meantime, after the first time she was at Lubyanka, they had said to her, if you want to live, basically, you will have to work for us as a counter spy. And so her job was to not just reporting for AP and MI, military intelligence here, but to report on the foreigners who came to Moscow, who came to Russia, and to find out how serious they were about being socialists, because the Bolsheviks only let people who were socialists come into the country. And so she had to report back on these people, whether it was reporters or diplomats or business people. Her job was to get information on all of them if she wanted to survive.
Okay, so she was released from prison, but only like paroled, I guess, right? Not allowed to just like leave Russia or anything like that.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. And then later she was re-imprisoned, and that was the most frightening of all.
Oh, I'll bet. I guess that they were not happy with the level of reporting and cooperation from her once they actually paroled her and gave a little taste of freedom there.
That's exactly right. She was trying to protect the people. In fact, she got the word out to the journalists who would come not to go near her because
Oh, wow.
she did not want to report on them.
Mm-hmm.
She did not want to betray her colleagues.
My gosh, she gets caught up in the most dangerous circumstances just everywhere she goes.
Well, while I was writing the book, every once in a while, the dangerous situations were so terrifying. I would say to myself, she's so courageous, but is she crazy?
Yeah. She is a very different kind of person than just about anybody else out there. That's really clear. But it was a little bit hard for me to figure out what brought her back to those situations. A lot of people, like something terrible and traumatic like that happens, and you kind of learn a lesson from it. And you say once was enough, but not Marguerite. She continually kind of sought out danger and risk and intrigue and that sort of thing through her whole life.
That's right. That's right. Whether she was in the Far East or she was in Russia again, or she was in Iran, it didn't matter. It didn't matter. She loved adventure. She really had a passion for adventure and danger.
My gosh.
Thus the title of the book, Flirting with Danger.
So once the Czecha kind of has hold of you, it's almost impossible to get away, but she ultimately did like extricate herself from that situation somehow. So what happened? How did she kind of get away from them and was able to leave Russia eventually?
Well, the Americans, she kept saying how we needed to help the Russians because they needed food desperately. And eventually the U.S. agreed to give them relief, but only if they released their American prisoners. And so that's how she was. It was a trade. It was a trade.
Okay.
And she was allowed to go free.
I see. And that, and yet she did not take the lesson from that it was time to settle down and live a quiet life by any means.
Oh, no.
She was really ready for round two almost, I guess you could say. So what happened after she was freed and she left Russia that time, at least?
She was sent on a top secret mission to the Far East, where the Japanese were arming up after World War I. They wanted more territory, and they knew that they would have to fight for it. And so they were building up their weapons, as were other countries, and as were the U.S. But the U.S. was very concerned about that. And she was sent to Japan, and she was in China and in Korea, and eventually worked her way back to Russia.
The allure of that place just must have been undeniable, I guess.
It's fascinating how some people really are just in love with the Russian soul, I will say. Not with the government, but with the spirit of the people and their incredible ability to survive all kinds of terrible situations. And with their intellectual life, their love of the arts, all of that, which really appealed to Marguerite.
Right. It's so amazing to me that she was drawn back there, having spent her time there, not just personally suffering, but being there during like a period of suffering for the Russian people. So it's not like she was remembering the good old days in Russia because she was not present for those, really. And yet she was just tremendously drawn back there to the point that she would, go back and face again for a third time, you could say.
Yes. So
Yeah, what a woman. She's quite a mystery, I have to admit. So I understand that later on in life, her life took like another turn, maybe a third or a fourth turn, I guess you could say, and she made some documentary films later on, sort of the golden age of cinema as it was just beginning, silent films.
When she was in Russia, she met a fellow who was a pilot with the American squadron in Poland during World War One, the Kosciuszko squadron, and they became friends. She helped him when he was imprisoned earlier than she was, and she helped him a great deal. When she came back from Russia, she wanted more adventure, and he did too. And he had started making movies. Now, we only had silent movies at that time. This was 1924, 23, 24. And he proposed making a documentary about a migratory tribe. And he had heard about one in Iran at the time, which was called Persia then. And she liked the idea as long as she could be part of the project. And so she gave him money for it, but she also wanted to be in the movie and went with him. They started out in Turkey just when Turkey was becoming a sovereign state and when it was becoming a secular state as well. So she was there and then went to Syria, Iraq, where she met Gertrude Bell, and then on to Iran, and went on a death-defying trip with a murderous, highly dangerous group of people, the Bakhtiari tribe, and climbed the highest mountains, ice-covered, snow-covered peaks of Iran, went on goat-skinned rafts through waterfalls that were impossible for most people, but that she crossed, and did this with the tribe and spent months there making this film. And when they came back, it was an award-winning film, highly praised. And the fellow who she made the movie with went on to make King Kong. So you know that he was a very capable fellow. But she got no credit because she was a woman.
Oh, wow.
And it made her furious. And she eventually separated working with him. She did not want to work. She did not want to do that anymore. And she actually started an organization with several other women who were explorers and scientists who had also been doing extremely important work and did not get recognition because they were women, were not invited to speak in places where they had prominent speakers, were not allowed to join clubs, professional clubs, because they were women. And so they went on to form their own Women's Geographic Society. And that became an important place for women to really support one another psychologically and with funding, in some cases, in their careers. And it attracted women like Margaret Mead and Eleanor Roosevelt and
Oh, wow.
women astronauts, and really important women. And it still exists today, which is terrific.
It's incredible. What a legacy she built for herself.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
So, Marguerite, did she ever settle down in the sense that we think of it? I mean, was she adventuring until the end of her days, really?
She went off to Europe again and lived there until World War II started. And then she came back here. She did a lot of lecturing. She and was well known for that. She wrote 5 books, and they were highly praised. So she was a busy person. She never really settled down. In the end, she wound up back in Baltimore with her son and his family. She lived nearby. And what was interesting was that I met her granddaughter, and I did interviews with her great granddaughter, who could give me a sense of what she was like. And that was very helpful, of course, for the book.
Oh, that's wonderful. I'm really surprised. Just everything that she did, everything that she accomplished. I'm surprised that she's not a little bit more of a household name than she is. Really, it just one amazing adventure after another, and connected to so many movers and shakers of history. Just astonishing story.
It is, but that happens. It happens with spies who just disappear into the cold. And it also happens very often with women, which is why I enjoy writing the book so much, because getting her name out there, I think Marguerite Harrison, it's important. And it's important to talk about her on your program and to do talks all around the country. And I certainly hope that this will help make her well known again.
Yeah, I certainly hope so as well. That's quite a legacy that needs to be more well known than it is currently. But your book is out there and it's making waves clearly, and it really had an effect on me, and I was very grateful for the chance to read it. For those of you who want to read it after you hear this interview again, the book is called Flirting with Danger: The Mysterious Life of Marguerite Harrison, Socialite Spy, by Janet Wallach. Janet, this has been a really fascinating talk, and I really appreciate it. Are you working on another book now that this one has been published, or do you have any other projects in the works at the moment?
Looking at several different women and trying to decide who would make the most sense for me to write about. It's a tricky process, and it takes years to write these kinds of books. It takes 5 or 6 years. So I have to think carefully about it before I do it, but I'm eager to get started.
That's wonderful. I'm glad to hear it. There's plenty more stories out there, plenty more untold or lesser known stories that need to be spotlighted, no doubt about it. Janet, do you have like a website or social media profile or anything like that you'd like to share if people want to follow along now that they've heard of this story from you?
Yes, they can check me out on Facebook. Just Google me, and on LinkedIn as well. I look forward to hearing back from people,
Okay.
and I hope that many of them will read the book. Yeah.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, we'll find those. We'll put those links in the show notes.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Janet. This has been absolutely fascinating, and I really appreciate you taking the time to write the book and to share the story with us here.
Thank you, Justin.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
If you're interested in more of Spycraft 101, look for my page on Instagram at Spycraft 101. You can also find more great articles on my website, spycraft101.com. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you'll stick around because there's lots more to come.
Disclaimer. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only. The stories and statements expressed herein are experiences and opinions. They may not reflect the views of the host or the production studio. It's okay if you disagree with our content. No piece of media is right for everyone. If you love Spycraft 101, please check us out online, on Instagram, on YouTube, and especially on Patreon. Thank you for listening.